I am one of you. In 1972, my wife and I loaded everything we had in our 1965 Chevrolet, and we moved to Coweta, and I started the best career any person could ever have. An Oklahoma educator, and I am proud to be an Oklahoma educator. And you know what? I can't help but wonder why there are those who are so worried about the fact that Oklahoma citizens who love public education, who are invested in public schools, who care about public schools, and yes, who work in public schools, finally reached the point where they had to make a statement today. Let me tell you something. There are 25,000 strong here today, and we won't be denied the opportunity to make that statement at the Capitol in the state of Oklahoma. This is the people's house, and we will be welcomed here. We will no longer stand quietly by while Oklahoma education crumbles around us. If we don't speak up about education and the lives of children, then who will? This is not a union-style rally about money. But let me tell you what it is about today, folks. It's about respect. It is about respecting those who work with our most precious resource, our children. Respecting them enough to pay those who work in Oklahoma schools a decent wage. Respecting them enough to provide personnel to adequately staff schools. And it is about providing resources to have all the materials that a teacher needs. And finally, we are here today to recognize the enormous importance of those who work with Oklahoma children. Let me tell you this, folks, and I'm fond of saying this in TPS, and they've heard me. There are two classes of people who work in education. There are those who do the work, and there are those who are supposed to support those who do the work. As for me, I'm in the support. It's my job to support the teachers and the people who are doing the work in the building, and it's the job of the Oklahoma legislature to support them.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Panel 5, Sustaining Environments. My name is Doug Hummel-Price. I'm a data scientist and a Crocus Fellow. I've worked with Bill since the summer of 2019 on the Crocus project. For this panel, it'll be set up just as the others. Unfortunately, Professor Amy Claessens cannot join us today due to illness, so I will step in and provide her remarks. Then we'll go to Dr. Karen Kitchens, who will discuss her research on magnet middle schools. Next, Dr. Nalette Broadnax will discuss her research on carceral ideology and magnet schools. And then finally, Dr. Cindy Decker will provide some perspective on Tulsa Public Schools during our cohort's high school years. After our panelists have given their remarks, we'll have a Q&A. Okay, I'll start with some motivation for including today's panel in the conference. The Crocus team has recently devoted a fair amount of attention to the sustaining environments hypothesis as developed by Drew Bailey and his colleagues at UC Irvine. The premise of that hypothesis is that the long-term effects of pre-K depend as much on the environments kids experience K-12 as they do as the environment kids experience in pre-K. A specific variation of the sustaining environments hypothesis says that the curriculum and pedagogy that pre-K alumni experience K through 3 helps to determine whether the initial boost in cognitive skills persists or fades away over time. Some fading is to be expected, but a strong, challenging K-3 experience might help to reduce fade out. So that leads us to the research. One of the nation's leading researchers on this subject is Professor Amy Claessens of UW-Madison, who unfortunately can't be with us today. In a series of papers co-authored with Mimi Engel, Claessens reached the conclusion that K-3 classroom experiences are important mediators between pre-K enrollment at age 4 and favorable academic outcomes in elementary school. Using ECLS-K data from a nationally representative sample of students who attended kindergarten in 1998-99, Claessens and her colleagues focused on reading and math content, whether it was basic or advanced. They wanted to see if a challenging kindergarten pedagogy boosted cognitive skills generally or had differential impacts, with bigger impacts on students who attended pre-K or perhaps bigger impacts on disadvantaged students. The results were somewhat surprising. Students generally benefited from a more challenging kindergarten curriculum. On the other hand, All types of students benefited from such a curriculum, not just pre-K alumni or Head Start alumni or disadvantaged students in particular. Still, these findings support the basic proposition that if you want children's cognitive skills to improve over time, you need a strong, challenging, stimulating elementary school curriculum. As for Crocus research, if mulligans were prevented in social science research, we would love to go back in time and gather systematic data on the K-3 pedagogy in Tulsa, how it changed over time, when it changed, that sort of thing. In retrospect, we regret that we didn't do so. Nevertheless, we do have some contemporaneous accounts on what was going on in early elementary classrooms in 2006 through 2010 when our students were enrolled in elementary school. Our sources include Andy and Janet McKenzie, both TPS employees who observed changes in pedagogy from two different vantage points. Andy as Director of Early Childhood Services and Janet as a teacher at the Kendall Whittier Elementary School. So the Tulsa context. Just before our cohort of students entered kindergarten in the fall of 2005, TPS launched two new programs whose reach encompassed pre-K through 5, Tulsa Reads in 2001 and Tulsa Counts in 2003. Both of these programs were a response to the new challenges and pressures associated with the No Child Left Behind Act. It was well understood that public schools would be under closer scrutiny and that standardized test scores would be used to judge performance. Tulsa Public School also integrated early childhood education best practices into its professional development practices and launched a new principal training program in conjunction with OU Tulsa. A key premise was to teach individual children and to meet their individual needs. As is often the case, the implementations of these emerging new norms was all over the map. Some principals got the core message and adapted their K-3 curricula and pedagogy to reflect widening differences in skills among entering students. Other principals set high standards for everyone, standards that in some instances were unlikely to be met. And other still principals offered less time for play, more time for drill and kill lessons, despite abundant evidence that this is seldom a good strategy. In short, Tulsa's elementary schools adjusted their standards and practices in response to national legislation and a new influx of better prepared students, but implementation was inconsistent and uneven, according to close observers at the time.
Hello again. Let's see. All right. I'm going to present work from a paper that was published in 2020 with myself, Sarah, and Bill, where we were looking at magnet schools and trying to figure out how much school quality, particularly in middle school, mattered in terms of whether or not pre-K students were going to these more frequently, and then how that played out in terms of academic performance. So while short-term effects of universal pre-K are now firmly established, long-term effects have been a little bit more elusive, whether we are observing fade-out or convergence. We wanted to see if we could find ways in which we could look at higher quality school environments along the way. So we looked to test, we proxied higher school quality by magnet schools, and we were looking to see whether or not attending early childhood education predicted attending a magnet school, and then did attending a magnet school predict higher test scores. So high quality magnet schools combined with a strong preschool program could both provide students with a double boost. Pre-K creates the initial surge, which a magnet school helps to sustain. So magnet schools that consider academic performance in their admission process could be especially advantageous to pre-K alumni who excel in elementary school because they would be more likely to be accepted as outstanding students. School quality after pre-K also might matter in sustaining long-term effects. So within the Tulsa School District, magnet schools are considered to be stronger across a variety of metrics, for example, test scores and student-teacher ratios. Also, magnet schools, historically, and in the case of Tulsa, have also focused on racial integration of schools. And we think that this could matter, particularly for students, Black or Hispanic students, where we know from a variety of literature that school segregation has very detrimental impacts to student performance. And so having this focus with magnet schools, we think could also be important. So we argue that superior magnet schools should attract pre-K alumni and that challenge and stimulate them enough to help increase or deal with the effects of fade out. TPS has two types of magnet schools: a lottery, in which students apply for the program, as well as an academic admissions-based, where it's based on school performance. And so we look at those separately as well as combined in kind of a variety of different ways in this paper. So we focus first on attending magnet schools. And again, kind of thinking through this all, we're not focused just on the 1 year, but how does your environment after pre-K matter in terms of sustaining these effects? So that's a little hard to see, but what's going on here is we are looking at the effect of attending an early childhood education program, what effect that has on attending a magnet school. And so on the left, we look at it for all students in Tulsa. So again, this is the exact same group of students that I've talked about previously and others have talked about as well. We do see a positive effect. So attending, we combined both pre-K and Head Start together for this particular paper. We see this positive effect. So on the left, we looked at lottery schools. On the right, we looked at admission schools, and we kind of see the same thing. But more importantly, we see that it's most effective or matters most for Black students and Hispanic students. Black students benefit the most in our lottery magnet admissions, and then when we look at admissions, we see that it matters most for Hispanic and Black students as well. So again, attending pre-K, attending these early childhood education programs, you're more likely to attend this magnet school. So kind of creating this sustaining environment path. So then we were interested to see, okay, well, if you're attending a magnet school, what effect does that have on your test scores? And similarly, we find these kind of large effects, which we expected to see that attending a magnet middle school really boosts your standardized tests. So on the left, we have reading tests, and on the right, we have math tests. We see really large effects for attending a magnet school after even controlling for kindergarten and third grade test performance. So we did have earlier tests in there to kind of control for this academic performance. We also see effects by subgroup, although in this case, white students did seem to see the largest effect from attending magnet schools, but we did see this kind of across the board. And when thinking through this, the bottom line is that pre-K is just 1 year in 14 years of education. And so we want to look at ways in which we see some promising ways to sustain results. And we did find that magnet schools are one potential path to help kind of sustain these results. And it's not just the focus on the academics, which we do think is very important, but also magnet schools really do focus on the effects of racial segregation and how that can kind of play out here too. And I think Nolette's going to probably talk about that a little bit more as she discusses her work.
Okay. Safety and order are important aspects of a school environment that sustains success. And this descriptive research that I'm going to talk about today examines the beliefs and ideas that inform those school environments, particularly related to the formation of school policies and with the use of discipline. This work is important given the large racial and socioeconomic disparities that we see in disciplinary outcomes. So what is carceral ideology? Carceral ideology is a belief system that views societal problems as individual and familial failures that are in need of some kind of correction. In schools, carceral ideology manifests as a toolkit that involves surveillance, coercion, and confinement. There are myriad examples of policies that involve these features: metal detectors and surveillance cameras, uniforms and strict dress codes, even academic surveillance through the use of extensive testing. I wanted to begin to understand discipline disparities, not from the lens of viewing students as flawed or deviant, but from the lens of schools creating environments where students may or may not be able to thrive. To examine this question, I look at school-level policy documents, school handbooks. I use web scraping to collect about 15,000 of these handbooks from middle and high schools across the United States. You can see the distribution of the schools where I collected these handbooks here on the map. And I started out with a simple measure, just looking at the frequency of carceral language in those handbooks. So specifically, words that are associated with surveillance, coercion, and confinement. Then I compared the patterns of carceral language with characteristics of the schools to see if there were any patterns. So what I've learned so far in the early stages of this project is that schools vary quite a bit in their use of carceral language. First, race and socioeconomic status of the school populations matter, as expected. Also, location matters, but not in the way that I was expecting. I expected carceral language to be closely aligned with urban poverty, but what I actually found is that urban schools were less likely to use carceral language, while rural and suburban schools were more likely, particularly if they served large populations of Black students. And finally, school type matters. We've already been talking about magnet schools here, and in another research project Karen and I worked on, we showed that magnet schools have much lower rates of discipline disparities than other types of schools. And so in this research, I found that charter schools are more likely to use carceral language, but only if they're serving large populations of students of color. But magnet schools were less likely to use carceral language across the board. So there's definitely something to be said here about magnet schools and the environments that they're creating, the ideas and the beliefs that they embody that at least shows up in the handbooks that they give to students. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cindy Decker. I'm the Executive Director of Tulsa EduCare, but I'm speaking today on this panel because I served on the Tulsa Public School Board from 2015 to 2019. So I'm thinking back to my prior role and what I can add today. I first just want to really give my amazing appreciation and admiration for all of the work done by this crew in the city of Tulsa. It's a beautiful, literally a beautiful research practice partnership. The academic rigor combined with the communication and partnership and now friends, have been created. The number of papers and the number of people is just, I feel so proud to be a part. When I came onto the Tulsa Public School Board, there was a new superintendent, and so there was a lot of change happening, a lot of new thinking coming from the superintendent. And my very first board retreat with the superintendent, she'd gathered with her team a bunch of data comparing Tulsa to Oklahoma City public schools. That seemed kind of a good comparison group and easy to gather data. And I very much remember that our reading scores within the district were similar to Oklahoma City's, but our math scores were way behind. And so it was kind of just an easy, seems like we should be able to do some things to improve the math scores. So I'm taking that and other information I have about math teaching in the district to say, I think that possibly the findings of math holding longer than reading is due to there being less teaching and quality teaching in the district on math. So it's like the pre-K impact, there was less convergence. So those who were behind in math, there was less teaching on it to get them back up. So that's kind of one of my theories about that. I'll also say, very importantly, in 2011, there was a Reading Sufficiency Act in our state, which you would be retained in grade if you didn't pass the third grade reading test. And so just even more time and attention around that time was all on reading and getting these kids to pass the test. Happily, that went away in 2014. Another finding that really I grappled grappled a lot with is the finding that the magnets help sustain the gains. And specifically, these papers have been on the middle school magnets. So for all the Tolsons in the school, I think we talk a lot about the elementary school magnets, but these papers were on the middle school magnets. While I was on the board, the equity of the middle school magnets was being questioned. We were worried about selection effects. First off, because the grade spans of elementary schools for the traditional elementary schools didn't align to nicely weave off for the grade span of the middle school magnets. So the middle school magnets began at 6th grade, but the traditional elementaries went through 6th grade. So if you were in a traditional elementary school, you might have never heard about this opportunity to get in a middle school magnet. You might have missed that, and it's very hard to get in 7th or 8th grade if you missed that 6th grade opportunity. And so the board, along with the superintendent and her team, worked very hard to align these grade spans and work very hard to advertise the middle school magnets now to all of the elementaries in the district. I do worry myself about creaming effects. So it was mentioned that half of the middle school magnets are based on academics and behaviors. And so there's a lot to, of course, we're doing that in colleges, but is it right to start that already as low as middle school? I'm not sure due to the equity reasons. I personally prefer the lottery effects, but I will admit my own child went to one of the academic middle school magnets. I would like to add that in 2015, the board authorized a middle school charter school to open. So again, more equity of getting more options in lower income parts of town, advertising to lower income families to make this more equitable. There was also just so much work on thinking about convergence, thinking about those lower performing schools and those lower performing kids. Immediately off the bat, every single suspension and expulsion that was requested in the district had to be approved by the superintendent. That's how she came in, and no surprise, very few were approved. And this now new behavior management strategies were being provided in professional development to teachers. It really shifted how all teachers within the district were thinking about their teaching and their part in the teaching. And we talked as a board about how the low performing schools, there were no pre-AP offerings. Just the rigor of the class wasn't the same. And they needed to be providing at least some rigorous classes in all middle schools and high schools. There was new curriculum rolled out across the district that was research proven and evidence-based, again, causing quite unsettling feelings by teachers asked to use new tools, but there was so much language about even if kids are behind, they need to have on-grade curriculum, and you can scaffold them up to the on-grade curriculum, but you have to be presenting it. So, of course, I just wonder, because all of this work was happening after the late cohort, the 2006 cohort, if possibly there'd be more convergence if this work was happening right. And it is happening right now, but not going through middle and high school. So I'll just end. I do want to add that of the middle school seats, 1/3 of them are in magnet schools. So a pretty good percentage go to these magnet schools. So the way to possibly sustain the gains of pre-K is to have magnet middle schools, but as I served on the board, that wasn't the problem I was trying to solve. I was more focused on how to get the most collective, equitable learning across the district, and what design of the district is going to do that. My question that I can't solve myself, but I'd like to pose out to all the smart people in the room is the answer to that question the same as the answer to how to get pre-K's impact to be sustained? Thank you.
All right, at this point, we'll turn it over to question and answer. So if there are any questions, we will take those now. And I can actually start with one. Dr. Brognax, who actually taught several of my data science classes here at McCourt, did you happen to look at, so you mentioned that the carceral ideology was more closely associated with rural settings. Was there any sort of exploration of whether that mapped at all to religion at all? Because a lot of small towns are very religious, and there are not elements of that corporal punishment, there's a lot of that sort of thing there. And I was wondering whether that was something that came up at all, or not quite sure how you would control for that with that many things. But
Sure, it's a great question. So I don't have a measure of religion. However, the rural schools that are using more carceral language are concentrated in the Deep South. So I would absolutely think that there could be a religious or a political, ideological angle that is playing a role there.
thank you.
I too am very curious about your research with carceral language, and I'm curious about whether you've examined parent endorsement or parent even knowledge of this language, and is it reinforced by parent ideology and belief, or is there pushback in any of these communities? Does it even come to light? I don't know if you've examined the community or parent lens with this question.
So I need to actually take some notes for like things I'm going to take back to work on, right? So I haven't examined parent views on the matter, but there are people who have. So Jaron Haber, who is a sociologist, has done some research looking at school websites and how parents respond to those websites. And so there's a similar element of what are schools actually trying to communicate to families and to the public. And so I haven't looked at that specifically, but it's something that I definitely want to link up with this research in the future, because we can't say that carceral language or that really carceral ideology in schools is inherently bad, especially when there is a demand for it. There are parents who seek out those environments. There are private schools, boarding schools, for instance, can also be very carceral in the way that they approach the environment. Catholic schools, schools that have a history of using corporal punishment, where parents are paying tuition to have their children in that environment. So it's something that's definitely on my radar.
I have a question about sustaining environments and how you distinguish them from good classroom practice or high quality schools. Are you using those terms synonymously, or do you have unique features that would make something a sustaining environment, but that is different from just a high quality instructional environment?
For our paper, we were using magnet schools as a proxy for high quality environment. And I think that was maybe like to Cindy's point, it's like if you can get high quality similar like across all schools, like that would be the goal. Like it's not necessarily that we want, every school to be a magnet school, but we would want every school to have similar high quality that we were observing in the magnet schools at the time. And we were using report cards as kind of a way to look at that and helping us determine like the high school. They tended to have higher grades on report cards at the school level.
So my question isn't really formulated right, so I'm gonna process out loud. So Cindy, you know this, and Kelly and Danielle is here. When we think about the magnet school issue in TPS, it feels really competitive. And it feels like you have to do everything, and I don't know how much of it has changed as a result of unified enrollment that happened, but it feels like you have to do everything right and start early. So when I see the research about, pre-K, that there is an effect of attending magnet schools if you go to pre-K, so that's woohoo for pre-K, right? But we also know about the racial inequities in going to magnet and the ability to go to a magnet school. So is a way for when I talk to our communities that say, hey, if you want your kid to go to the best TPS school, you got to put them in pre-K. Like, what are we saying here? And I'm trying to like pull this out because it feels, the whole magnet school issue feels kind of insidious in Tulsa.
Oh gosh, all the eyes came to me. Well, you're feeling my pain in preparing for today. I couldn't land on, exactly how I was feeling about this, and I kept trying to digest more of the research to maybe prove some of my just observations wrong. Because, woohoo for pre-K. I mean, the fact that if anyone goes to pre-K, you're more likely to go to middle school magnet, that makes me feel better about it all. Because I did share at lunch, I haven't felt that there are selection effects going on in pre-K that are tilted towards higher income families. I felt that the word, probably due to a lot, Impact Tulsa, due to CAP Tulsa, due to Tulsa Educare, I felt that high quality pre-K is getting out equitably. But you're talking about the elephant in the room when you live in Tulsa and the middle schools, and it is very competitive to get into them. I think on the list of these middle school magnets, though, are Rogers and Thoreau and Monroe was part of the grouping. And those three don't have all of the competitiveness attached to them. So, of course, I'm almost wondering, what does it look like by school? Yeah.
So we have the lottery versus the admission. So we did break it out by that because the lottery, tends to be a little bit more fair. And that's where we do see the positive effects. But we actually didn't find them for white students. So we did see it primarily for black students that they're getting into the lottery school, which was kind of weird that you can find that there. I think that we struggled a bit with what you're kind of finding is that the magnet schools were helping white students the most. And when we broke it down by lunch status, we also, we did find some effects there as well. But we were, kind of seeing some interesting results. We did also look at high school, and we kind of found similar patterns there. High school is a little bit harder because we were looking at PSAT scores at the time, and we had some missing data, so I didn't talk about those results. But one other thing that we did with high school is we actually knew who applied and who was accepted, and so we could kind of look at that group that was people that were interested in attending that actually applied to it versus those who were actually accepted. And kind of, we also found some effects in that small group as well. But I agree that it's not necessarily a easy story to.
Yeah, and since there are economists in the room, I think it's, competition. The magnets were creating this competition for these kids, but I'd argue in this case, competition is not necessarily leading the non-magnets to lift up across the board. In a few cases it is, but in most cases it's depleting resources. It's causing more children with behaviors who adults find challenging all ending up in the same school, and it's even more hard to handle those behaviors, of course, if there are more of them and more IEPs. I mean, it's just kind of known in Tulsa if your child has a disability that is, even kind of a mild one, you might want to go to Thoreau, the lottery school, don't go to the academic school. And so just all this sorting that goes on and the driving that goes on, then we don't have our neighborhoods at all, and it doesn't feel equitable at all.
We have time for a few more.
Thank you. Well, these are really important issues. Cindy, I wonder if you could clarify the distinction between academic and lottery magnets a little bit further, because as I understand it, the academic magnets are not pure academic schools. Their admissions are shaped, to be sure, by students' academic skills, but they're also embedded in a quadrant system that helps to ensure that there's diverse enrollment in these highly regarded and highly competitive schools. So maybe you could talk about that. And let me also put in a plug for some of the work we have on our website, including a policy brief by Doug Hummel-Price and myself and Sarah Amadon, where we try to talk about race, ethnicity, and public policy in Tulsa based on some of the different studies we've done. And if you look under, under the research icon, you'll find a bunch of papers and policy briefs on the subject of race and ethnicity if you want to pursue those issues further. So, Cindy?
Sure. The academic middle schools, there are two of them and they're extremely different. So one is what you might find if you looked at magnet schools nationally. It's in an African-American part of town. It was an integration strategy to pull whites into the African-American part of the city. And it is done through, there are 4 quadrants, so yeah, it should be quadrants means 4, but, and they'll let in a quarter of kids from each of the quadrants sorted on a point system. So it does ensure that you will still get a quarter of the kids if that many apply from lower income parts of the city, and it's located in a lower income part of the city. It might even have a small geographical component where you get a few more points if you live around the school. But the other academic middle is in a higher income part of the city, and it does not use the quadrant system. It just takes the same points, rank orders them, and then they just go down the list. I would like to add that that academic middle school also has a traditional middle school in the same building. So all of it's there. I thought one kind of interesting conversation I had one day with a teacher in that middle school. We were, as a district, struggling with funding and wondering about, we were messing with the class size tables. And so I said, you know, how would you feel if you have more kids in your class? And he says, well, if it's on the magnet side of the middle school, I can go up to 40, maybe even 50 kids, and I can still teach at a good quality level. But on the non-magnet side, I shouldn't have more than 20, or I'm going to feel that I'm not very successful. And so that is a great example of kind of the cost of doing good work in the 2 different types of schools. The lottery schools are, I don't know exactly if they use the quadrant system. Rogers and Thoreau, if somebody in the room knows, feel free to. Kelly, do you know that? Or Danielle?
Rogers has, one of the lottery schools has a connection to the other schools in its neighborhood where there isn't a feeder to a middle school otherwise. So a couple of those schools have sort of automatic seats if their students want to go there. So they basically get bumped up on the list ahead of the other lottery students. But that's really about proximity and some work that was done intentionally to develop and support that community.
To point out is, though, as you were mentioning, Cindy, is though the system is designed to ensure that we have an equitable approach, what happens, though, is that oftentimes we don't have enough kids from particular quadrants apply. So there we still have real access issues to the magnet schools, and or not sufficient kids in particular quadrants qualifying as they apply. So the quadrant system is meant to help, but we're not there yet.
I'll mention that the Crocus website is crocus.georgetown.edu. You can also get there by just Googling Crocus and Georgetown. It gets you there very, very quickly. But there you can find that race policy brief and pretty much all of the other work associated with all of the great researchers today. All right, let's go ahead and thank our panelists.